Greetings and welcome to the Richard Dolan Show, where every week we fight the good fight. Happy to be here. We're doing a video version of the program, and my guest for this episode is not just a friend. He's not just a colleague. He is much more than that to me in my life. He is my co-author. We co-authored AD After Disclosure together. He is Bryce Zabel. Bryce, so glad to have you on the program.
I'm glad to be here. And in fact, after 10 years, I'm glad to be anywhere. When you think about how much time has gone by, it's unbelievable. But congratulations to both of us for still being around. Good for us.
Could not agree more. So I just want people to know, lots of folks do know these facts about you, but just it's worth saying that you are the co-creator, I should say, of what is still a great television show in our history, that is Dark Skies. You did that with Brent Friedman back in the late 90s. And to my mind, it's still really the best treatment of the UFO cover-up that anyone's really attempted to do. I mean, The X-Files is a great show, great drama. You got Mulder and Scully. Blue Book, which is more recent. There's fun things about Blue Book, but what you guys did is you really tried to go deep on the history of the UFO phenomenon and to flesh out, like, who would MJ-12 have been? What would their policies have been? And to my mind, I think that's still the best treatment of that whole subject.
You're very kind to say that. I know we're here to talk about After Disclosure, so I'll keep that brief. One of the things we did do that you're referring to is going into this thing, we created this massive timeline where we literally took every ufological event and put it in a timeline, and we did this in a graph. And then we took every historical event and put it in a timeline. And then when they would match up, we said, there's an episode, right? That's how we kind of went about it. Cool. And we also, said to ourselves, let's not tease anybody. This is the real deal. Let's show them a UFO in the first scene, and let's show them the inside workings of Majestic 12. Because I guess I'll just end it this way. Our theory was, if Roswell was a true event in 1947, by the time JFK was rolling into Washington with the New Frontier, there had to be some stuff going down on this topic. Absolutely. And we just wanted to dive into that, so we did. So thanks for bringing it up. And by the way, it doesn't stream, and it's not the Dark Skies movie that came out a few years ago, which people think I wrote. I did not write that. That was somebody using my Dark Skies title to sort of bring something to their movie, whatever. Dark Skies,
Hollywood.
Yeah, that was I could weep about that one. But so Dark Skies, the television series that Rich has generously brought up, is not a streaming thing, but there's an insanely great DVD set available through Shout Factory or on Amazon or wherever. And anyway, enough.
Well, yeah, I think it's worth that that people know that. And the other thing I just want them to know about you is you have a very active blog site called On the Trail of the Saucers, and maybe we can talk about that a little later if we have time. But we want to get into After Disclosure. This is what you and I did, and it started out as a series of phone calls. You actually had called to you wanted to do some work on my 2 volumes of History of UFOs, National Security State. And we don't even need to go into all that detail. What really ended up happening was we had a series of phone conversations that morphed into what became After Disclosure. And we discovered, I really like this guy. We're kind of simpatico in our ideas about UFOs. And we both realized, I don't know when this flash happened, maybe March or April of 2010, when we realized we could write a book that no one's ever done before. And that's what we set out to do. In fact, I've got edition 1 here.
Excellent.
And
Love
I've
that.
got edition 2, which is
Love that too. That's the abridged edition for people that want a little less in their lives. I just have to say that I'm not going to let you skip by UFOs in the national security state so easily. The truth of the matter is, I loved that series of books. I read both of them, and I thought they were just they were overwhelming in their research, and they made me, I was already, solid, but I was way more solid after it. So I wanted to figure out a way to maybe make those into a television series. So we started talking about that. And as I recall, the thing that got to both of us is you didn't write those books without having a serious library of your own. And I had a pretty serious one myself. And neither one of us had a single book that was all about disclosure.
No.
And in fact, very few books had even a paragraph or two about them. So
no one had written about it.
no. So, sometimes I guess if you're a doer, you say, well, if the book isn't available for me to read, I guess I better write it. So that's what we did. And I never looked back. I thought it was a brilliant experience for me personally and for me professionally. So I have nothing but fond memories about it.
Yeah, same here. The thing that we, set out to do, it's a 2-phase book, as I always saw it, which is phase 1 is we ask a question. How might UFO secrecy end? So what might be the triggers and the movers that would get that whole thing? Because when we wrote this in 2010, this is before the New York Times started covering the subject in 2017 onward. We're in a different era now. We need to talk about that, by the way. But in 2010, it was like the cover-up was very severely in place. Like for anyone who's around 10 years ago, we all remember UFOs were still getting no love from the media. They were really getting no attention from the political establishment, like nothing. And so we really wanted to know, how could this seemingly immovable structure of secrecy get jarred loose in one way? So that was part of the book. And then the whole rest of the book, really more than half of it, was us trying to answer the question, what then? Like how would the end of secrecy rock our world? And to this day, actually, no one else has really tried to do this type of a book. I always felt that we handled it the way a think tank might try to handle it. In other words, to really just be as analytical about our society as possible and look at the different sectors, whether it's science, whether it's academia, whether it's religion, whether it's culture, and whether it's geopolitics, which we did at the end, and how all of these and other parts of our society would be transformed. And that was hard to do because it really required a leap of imagination, but we tried to ground that imagination, speculation on the facts as we understood them. So that's what we tried to do.
It's interesting because I think when we started out, it was pretty clear. We had a UFO historian who knew his stuff. And then we had this dramatist who, I don't know, was a Hollywood guy, and we thought, well, let's just, fuse them together. And, the speculative stuff, Bryce can think about that. And Rich and then as we started to write, we went, no, that's not going to work. Because I think we both realized that we had things to say about both different versions of it. So we ended up writing on top of each other using Google Documents, which I thought was great. And it gave us because if you trust the other writer, you just let them write on top of you because they're going to make you smarter and it's a better product. So we did that. And I just want to pick up on one thread. There really are 2 concepts inside that book. There is the one which is AD after disclosure. If you think about AD, I've always thought of it as a calendar marking point. And I guess that was the inspiration for our title, which is everything's going to change after we all commonly agree that we're not alone and they're here now, not out there waiting for SETI to ring them up.
Yeah.
And so that AD after disclosure was the speculative look, the look into the future and trying not just to have banal little statements, but to give it some legs and to make it specific. But buried within that is you can't have an AD if you don't have a BC. And for us, BC meant before confirmation. That's the world we're still in today, although we are in the final stages of it probably. And to go back to your point, we were in 2010 most definitively in a BC world.
Very much so. Well, before we're done here, I really want to talk with you about this whole phase that we're in right now, because I have some thoughts about it. I really want to hear your thoughts too. But one thing that stands out with me relating to our book, I think there's a lot of things that we really did get right, or at least I think our thinking was in the right direction. But there's one thing that's turning out differently than how at least I anticipated, probably you too. And that's everything that's been going on for the last 3 years in the UFO field. And I will just say, when we imagine the end of secrecy, again, we're writing in 2010 and things were so it was so repressive by the standards of today in terms of what can we talk about publicly in terms of UFOs. Like, it's easy to forget the UFO subject was still pretty much not in polite society. So we were imagining something happens, something big happens that would jar this whole thing loose. And I think both of us were thinking something big happens and that's going to start an avalanche. And what we haven't seen is that avalanche. What we're seeing instead is drip, 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 drip.
Yeah.
New fact, new fact, new fact. We're seeing the New York Times write about UFOs. That's shocking. That would have been shocking to us in 2010.
I'm
And yet,
still shocked.
even with the New York Times writing about it, though, like the other shoe hasn't dropped. We're still in this kind of sort of maybe there's something there going phase. No one's really talking about cover-ups, even after 3 years of. So I'm waiting for the avalanche and it hasn't happened. And I'm wondering, did we get something wrong? Or what do you think about that?
I don't think we got anything wrong. I think right and wrong is kind of a value that I'm not going to buy into. We did the best we could, and we were more or less accurate about the disclosure issues. I still think it stands on its own. As to, how it was going to come about, I mean, that's a tough one. I mean, who among us could really in 2010 have said Donald Trump will be president? And who among us would have said that UFO disclosure would take off because of Tom DeLonge? And who among us would have said that the New York Times would be writing about crash wreckage? And who among us would have said the U.S. Navy was going to actually let 3 videos of their encounters out? So we did, however, predict that things like that would happen. And
Yes.
so there they are.
And in fact, what I would say to that is one thing we both really saw is that we had an expression in the book, which was that disclosure is impossible and inevitable. It was this paradox. I really liked that phrase because I felt that it really encapsulated UFO secrecy. And it was always, we felt it was impossible because, frankly, there was just no motivation that we could see for those people with the UFO knowledge and secret to let it out, because I think we both concluded they had too much to lose in terms of repercussions of the secrecy itself, like, how have you lied to us all these years and all of that? But then also in terms of letting out the science that undoubtedly has been learned, energy secrets, propulsion secrets, who knows God what else. So that's why it would be impossible, but inevitable, because we both could see in 2010 that the world was in such a tumultuous state of change. WikiLeaks was still a fairly new thing. Cell phones, smartphones were actually a fairly new thing in 2010. Videos capability on people's phones was a fairly new thing. The video conferencing, Skype, and just telecommunications, instant worldwide, was actually, all of that was new. So we could see that there were a lot of things stirring the pot. And I think what we both recognized is that unexpected things were going to happen in our society that we're going to force us open. It's actually what did happen. So we didn't predict To the Stars Academy. We didn't predict Tom DeLonge, but we did predict that conversations would be bubbling up more and more and more and more, and somehow would force their way into the public consciousness. So that, I think, we did kind of see, but the details are always going to be impossible, right?
Yeah, I mean, the details always were, the devil is in the details.
Yeah.
I think for a little bit of, just sort of drama, we had the president announcing something at the beginning.
Right.
That was always a possibility. I mean, it still is technically, but it didn't have to be that way. It was just a way to get people's attention and to sort of ground them. But I have one actual thing that, as you were talking, I was just thinking about it. What is the other shoe? Well, I'll tell you what the shoe is. If you listen to what's going on in the media right now, and even in ufology, if you read people's Twitter accounts, I'm not saying across the board, I'm not saying all the time, but you get the sense that the only thing that ever happened in ufology, if you watch Unidentified, for example, is that the Navy put out 3 videos. And that these 3 videos, that's all the information we have. We've got to figure out these 3 videos. And basically, is it a danger to national security because we have Navy videos? Well, Rich, you wrote 2 phenomenal books that say otherwise. Your UFOs in the National Security State lay out chapter and verse of thousands of things that are part of ufological history. Some of them are probably crazy, right? Because people lie and things have happened.
Right.
But the overall sustaining force of those two books is that this phenomenon is real and it's been going on a long time. So what is the other shoe? Well, for me, it's really got to be context. You cannot keep writing about these Navy videos and not say, well, by the way, while you guys are debating whether they're from China or Russia or the United States, let's recall that in the 1940s, we were seeing the same things with the same 5 observables.
Thank
Who
you.
the hell made those?
Thank
Was it
you.
China or Russia or the United States? No, it was not. So this whole conversation has been asked and answered, and you wrote the Bible on both of those.
Well, thanks, man. I will just say, like, over the last several years, I've been saying this over and over and over again to anyone who's willing to listen, which is like, there is a historical reality that goes way back beyond the Tic Tac UFO encounter of 2004, which is a great encounter. I'm glad it's out there. We need to know about it. But Tic Tac like UFOs have been seen since before, actually, the 1940s, and with performance capabilities every bit as incredible as what, Commander David Fravors reported. So, yeah.
I don't think China made those, by the way. I'm just going out on a limb here.
Absolutely no way, and not Russia. And, then there's the whole argument, oh, well, this U.S. black budget, which to me is almost like saying it's magic, because the people who are saying it's a U.S. black budget thing are not providing the slightest bit of science behind how this thing could do what it does. Like they're just taking this wild guess saying, oh, black budget. It's not really a good explanation either. Like, and the fact is, this goes back decade and decade. And so this is why, like, I actually assumed if there would be some kind of acknowledgement, this is back to AD, our book.
Yeah.
We assumed if there was going to be an open acknowledgement that these phenomenon are real. And that's what the New York Times just said that just a month ago.
Yes.
They said UFOs is not a matter of belief anymore. We know they're real. It's like, wow, New York Times. So I had always assumed, and I'm guessing you did too, that once an acknowledgement like that was out, people would put 2 and 2 together and they would think, wait a minute, it's real now, had to be real in the 1940s. So what about Roswell? What about all the other events that we've read about in history? And that's what no one's asking about. Like, that's the other shoe. That's the avalanche that I've been expecting to happen.
It's wacky. But Rich, I think I think what we're saying right here, we're probably not the only people thinking this, but we are giving voice to it right now. And it is kind of a frustrating thing. I mean, you just have what other subject would media just parrot back what they read someplace else and not try to do a little context? Okay.
Right.
So context needs to be applied to this. And I'm not just talking about global context. I'm talking about the fact that if you read what came out of the Senate Select Committee and the words from Marco Rubio and all that, this is all great stuff. But and the unidentified series, frankly, and everything Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon have said, great guys, but what they keep phrasing, I think that they have been saying to themselves, look, the public can only take so much. And so the way to get this, to get the horse poking into the barn here is to focus on these Navy videos and try to appear open-minded. Maybe they're China, could be Russia, might have been us, who knows? Okay, that phase is wrapping up based on, I guess, their last episode. That phase is wrapping up, and now we're in a new phase, which is, okay, they weren't making these in the 1950s, and yet people were seeing them. I mean, I've got a couple of Kehoe's books that I started reading a couple of weeks ago just for the fun of it. Well, my God. I mean, the same kind of stuff going on in 1950.
Yes.
I think at the end of World War II, the one thing we could say is if you had a piece of technology, you freaking used it. If you had the A-bomb, you blew it up. If you had a jet, you would have used it. Whatever you had in World War II, you would use it. So here we sit saying that somehow we had UFOs coming out of flying saucers that could do all these things out of World War II. I don't buy it. And I'm sure you don't either. So
no, I don't. I agree with you completely. What's interesting about the current discussion on this subject now is and hopefully we can circle back to our book because we have a lot of things that talk
That's
about
true.
this.
Yeah.
But with the New York Times coverage, I actually think it's helpful to focus on that for a minute. So the last piece that Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal wrote from I think July 23rd, I think it was when they published that. That was an article that had a very big buildup in the UFO community. We all knew that it was coming out, and I think it's fair to say when the article came out, people who were following this closely were a little disappointed. I think we were expecting a bit more. Nonetheless, it was important that the Times published this. They did have this statement that there's kind of sort of maybe been a little bit of crash retrievals. We can't confirm it, but they talk about Dr. Eric Davis briefing Capitol Hill and the Pentagon on objects that are not from this earth. All of that's really important. But you can also see, like there was the interview that Leslie and Ralph did with a really great fellow named Jay over at Project Unity. And you could see that they were trying not to admit this, but you could also see throughout the interview, they were both stating there was a tremendous amount of control over them at the New York Times.
Oh, yeah.
Blumenthal used the phrase, I think, an infinitude of levels above us, that the article had to go all the way up. Right. So really, I think my take on all of this is that, like, I look at the two of them as absolutely legit journalists who are really trying their best to do a good piece on this, but they're working in the New York Times, and the New York Times clearly, this is my take on it. They have a policy which is, we're going to let this out a little bit, but that's it, only a little bit, and we're going to keep the brakes on this. So there's still a very, very strong reticence among the establishment, if we can call them that, to really slow walk this whole thing. And I think it's not the journalists, it's the upper levels, which is clearly tied into national security. New York Times, I don't think there's any question about it. So they're deciding to slow walk this disclosure process. And that's like the only thing that I don't know how to predict is, like, is this part of a general disclosure policy, or are they actually trying to just stop it in its tracks? Because I actually do see there's a possibility that this disclosure train is going to hit its last stop for a while and may not move beyond where we are for another couple of decades. Like, I actually think that's possible. There are other people who think, nope, the momentum's too great and we're just going to keep going.
I read a book called After Disclosure where the authors contended that it was inevitable. So I think I'm not sure that we can put this back. You raise a couple of points. Yes, people were a little disappointed in the last Times article, but so what? I'm a trained journalist. I mean, that's what my degree is in, and I've reported for CNN for a while. So I look at that and I read it and I felt like, this has the earmarks of a lot of editors on it. And the various levels that it would have had to go through. And I think that's probably reasonable. There are places where it sort of peters out, and then in the middle, it started that crash wreckage thing, which frankly is burying the lead. If you have crash wreckage, the lead is crash wreckage, not, oh, by the way, they're going to have a report from the Senate in 18 months.
We already knew that.
Yeah. So I just felt like something's not quite right about that. Yeah. But I do think there's one other thing that's kind of possibly going to happen, which is, Kean and Blumenthal, for the time being, own this story, right? As journalists, there are other people reporting it. I've written articles, you've written articles. There's Politico's involved, and other people are writing. But in terms of breaking the news right now, you'd have to say that the New York Times with Kean and Blumenthal have the heat. They are the Woodward and Bernstein of the moment. But let's remember something historically. And that, by the way, is one of the things that I thought we did well in After Disclosure. We took historical precedents and then applied them to the UFO disclosure thing. So historical precedent would be Woodward and Bernstein owned Watergate. But then what happened? Well, they continued to set a high bar and have to break new stories, but other newspapers got involved. It wasn't just the Washington Post breaking Watergate after a while. And so what's happening right now is, because it's such a crazy story for most journalists, is they sort of have to hide behind the New York Times right? Because it's like, I don't want to go out on that limb by myself and get chopped off. But if I'm only regurgitating what they're saying, maybe it won't be so dangerous to me as a professional. But I guarantee you that there are probably 2 or 3 newspapers or magazines or whatever, where reporters and editors are huddled together right now saying, okay, can we break something big? Can we take this initiative away from the Times? And somebody's going to do that.
That actually would be a great thing to see. That would be the beginning of that avalanche effect that I've been waiting for all this time. And there's some signs here and there. Chris Mellon brought to everyone's attention, at least my attention, that Scientific American had done. He did an interview on CNN and he talked about Scientific American. And I thought, oh my God. And I read it. It was a very good piece. And there's other pieces. Popular Mechanics, of all places, has done some pretty decent UFO journalism. And there's others like mainstream-ish types of publications. So I think your point is a good one. There is this at least potential for the story to get bigger and to go beyond the New York Times. And there are other private independent journalists that I know that are out there working various aspects of this. So there's definitely room for forward motion. I just wonder, I don't know if this is really the best place to put this thesis at, and we can just let this hang. But again, I wonder if all that we get moving forward is where we are at right now. So in other words, yes, a recognition that some of these UAP or UFOs are real. So we're kind of there, but we're not at the recognition. We're at a tacit recognition that there may have been crash retrievals. We're not at a formal confirmation of that. So that's kind of interesting. That's a really interesting place to be. And we're certainly not at the place where anyone's admitted that there's bodies in, captivity anywhere, live or dead. There's no recognition or discussion of a cover-up. So we're kind of at this recognition where the government was trying to be even back in the 1960s, which is, we don't really know what these things are. And they're almost there now. Like, is it China? Is it Russia? Maybe it's extraterrestrial. And they're just kind of leaving it out there. And it occurred to me that we could be at that place for another 10 years or more, potentially, if there are no further genuine inside leaks that come out. So,
well, you're right.
That's my fear.
You're right. It's not crazy to say that, but I, again, would take a look at it. Since we're talking about AD, what we said about AD was, we have a mutual friend, by the way, who I won't invoke, but who has predicted every year without fail that next year there'll be UFO disclosure. So I'll always say about our friend that eventually he's going to be right. So, but what we took was the longer view on UFOs and disclosure and said, because it was impossible, that's the grit in the gears right now. But the inevitability means that if you just go out over the horizon a little bit further, you will have it. So could it be put back in the box for a 3-year period, 3 to 5 year period? Probably. Is it going to happen? I don't actually think so, but it could. But the arc of history on this one is toward this openness, whatever comes. Yeah. And let's face it, you just reeled off some names. It's not just the New York Times, it's Scientific American, Politico, Popular Mechanics, The Drive. There's a lot of great people that have written, really good articles, and you're doing fantastic work. There's other, there's just a lot going on, a lot of ideas being discussed that will still be advanced. And it's kind of strange because we live in a time where it used to be, if the New York Times said something, we would all go, oh my God, it's in the New York Times. Now we have at least 40% of the country that goes, well, don't believe anything in the New York Times.
I'm one of them.
Yeah, exactly. So that's my point. It's like it by itself doesn't mean what it used to mean. So
I mean, it doesn't mean everything is a lie coming out of the New York Times, obviously, but there's a lot of spin. There's a lot of collaboration with the national security community. They did give us the weapons of mass destruction almost 20 years ago, and they gave us a lot more that was totally fake. And so when they started doing the whole UFO 180 turnaround, I mean, it made my head spin just like everyone else's. And I really
why do you think that they've done it? Why do you think that? Why has the New York Times decided after all these years to get in the UFO business?
I will tell you why I think. In fact, my first response back in December 2017, I'm back to my first response. I came to it, then I moved away from it. Now I'm back to it. And my first response was TTSA was actually driving this car, not the New York Times. TTSA had their press conference back in October of 2017. DeLong's up there on stage with people like Putoff and Mellon and Elizondo. And it's really, I mean, they had some flubs on the press conference. They had the picture of the Mylar balloon and all of that stuff. But it's easy to forget how important that press conference was. And there was a very credible group of individuals on stage with Tom DeLonge who were talking about the reality of this phenomenon. That was a very big deal.
Very
and
big.
So what we now know is behind the scenes, people like Chris Mellon particularly were driving this to get to the mainstream. And so they got the New York Times to bite. My take on the New York Times was that the New York Times upper management, and this is only my speculation, saw that this story was going to come out, hell or high water. It was going to come out.
Yeah.
That they might as well take control of this and guide the narrative the way they wanted it to be guided. And in fact, if you read, there were two articles that came out on December, was it 17th, I guess?
Yeah.
December 16th, 2017. And in the one where they talked about ATIP, they brought in these two skeptical statements, like out of the blue, that had no bearing on the story whatsoever, except as I always felt, psychological placeholders to just slow this whole thing down, to tell people, don't get excited. There's a lot of reasons for skepticism. So what the New York Times did is they let some of this out, but they did not go pedal to the metal. And they did everything that they could, in my opinion, to maintain as much control over the narrative as possible. Now, it's impossible once you get some momentum on this. Even the New York Times, which is the voice of the establishment, really can't necessarily control everything. And so, but they've tried. And in the last piece that Leslie and Ralph wrote, I thought there's a lot of evidence to show that they were really putting the brakes on as well. So I think that's my whole take on the New York Times, is that it's controlling and slowing this disclosure narrative as much as possible.
You know, it's interesting, though. In my other life as a television dramatist, I've optioned, certain projects over the time, based on true stories. And one of them in particular, I won't bore you with the details of what it was about, was not UFO related, but it was a story about how the local community newspaper, the scrappy little newspaper in Portland, Oregon, ended up winning the Pulitzer Prize for investigative journalism by taking on powers and authorities that the established papers wouldn't take on, right? Mm-hmm. There are journalists out there, some of them we already know their names, and some of them we do not know their names yet, right? Who are going to be important in breaking this. And I would expect the New York Times to get some credit when you or me are together, we write the history of this disclosure moment. The New York Times will get their due. But somebody who we're not even talking about right now is probably going to get their due. It's not Tom DeLonge. It's not the New York Times. It's somebody we don't even quite put there yet, because that's how history unravels. I just had one thing I wanted to throw out there, because there's a lot of coded messages that may be part of this thing. Here's just a weird one. You were kind enough to mention I've written these series of essays or articles. I call it like a column. I'm trying to write an old-fashioned column once a week. And for people that want to know how to get there, it's whatifufos.com will take you to a link where you can get to it. But that's not what I'm talking about. I wrote an article in the run-up to the New York Times article about crash wreckage, where everybody was zizzing like a mint strip waiting for this thing to, come and happen. And this article I wrote said Roswell was the real deal. Okay. And it was called, Yes, We Have UFO Crash Wreckage. And it 100% was about Roswell being the real deal. Mm-hmm. Guess who, not a retweet, not a repost, but somebody who put it at the top of their personal website was Chris Mellon.
Yeah.
He left it there for 30 days. It was unchallenged for 30 days as the top thing on the Chris Mellon website. Now, why would Chris Mellon do that? I mean, listen, it could just be that he thought it was a cleverly worded article, in which case, thank you, Chris. I don't mean to read too much into it. But on the other hand, when you're playing in the security establishment, as you well know, you can't just hold a news conference about everything you're thinking. You have to like do it with a little more cleverness.
Yeah.
So I just put out there, you know, when we say, well, what's the next shoe? It could easily be Roswell. In fact, you and I talked about it when we wrote AD, because we said, if you had a problem where there were multiple scenarios going on, maybe there's time travelers, maybe there's aliens, maybe there's interdimensional, maybe there's more than one, maybe there's 5, maybe there's 50, right? If you've got something, and maybe there's abductions, if you've got something that is so crazy, but you know the pressure is on, you got to tell something. It would sure be a lot easier to tell the truth about something from 1947 and say, yeah, that happened. We're sorry we kept it under wraps, but we don't have any more to say about it since then.
I'm looking at your article here right now, and it really is a great piece. But I wonder how much they would be able to deal with a subject like Roswell. I mean, whether it's TTSA or anyone in the government, are the records there? Are they able actually, like they probably know. In fact, I will guarantee you that everyone in TTSA, because most of them have clearances of one sort or another, they definitely know that crash retrievals are real. I mean, Eric Davis's statement, he's not in TTSA, but I consider him part of an honorary member, I guess you could say. Like, they all know that this is a real thing. But can they prove it? And are they able to prove something like Roswell? I couldn't say.
Well, I mean,
may not be able to.
But if it really happened and it really represented an otherworldly, or what, you know, if it ain't us, if it was somebody else besides us, there are a lot of witnesses over the years. It's kind of low-hanging fruit in terms of writing the speculative article. I'm not predicting it any more than we were predicting it would be exactly as we laid it out in our book. But there is, when you say, what is the thing that will change it from this drip, drip, drip to what we talked about, the avalanche? We may not know, but it could be something like that.
To me, that's the big question right now. We've been waiting. I've been waiting for this inevitability, and it hasn't happened, but maybe it will. Now, I want to ask about something else relating to our book. We've got, just 20 minutes to go, and I want to talk about
the book. Well,
so remember this
thing.
So one of the things that struck me about the book when we concluded it was how revolutionary the end of UFO secrecy would be. I mean, we looked at culture, we looked at science, we looked at academia, we looked at politics, we looked at geopolitics, international politics, we looked at a lot of other things. I'm not even remembering them all. The backlash of the end of secrecy, like angry people, the pitchforks mob, coming in. You lied to us. All of these things were, things that we put out there as real possible repercussions of the end of UFO secrecy. What strikes you as something that we wrote that still seems pretty much on point? Are there, like, we're not at the post-disclosure world, so it's fair for us to ask because we don't have to worry about being wrong yet. What do you think is some of the more on-point predictions that we might have made?
I'm very, I gave it a light read over. I've read it several times over the years. I've always enjoyed it. And I have the same, by the way, response you have. I'll read it and I'll go, did I write that or did Rich write that? And I can't remember because we wrote on top of each other enough that I don't have any memory. But I think, to answer your question, it feels like a lot of the things where we broke it down into government. We had, the economy, energy, religion, sports, politics. We did not suffer from a lack of humility, from too much humility. We just said, we're going to go out there and try to say something. On all of those, I would say those hold up pretty damn well right now.
Mm-hmm.
That is the part where, we didn't have to As an example, it's like one of the things that we said that I think is going to be borne out to be fairly true is that even in politics, our political system will realign itself to take in the whole disclosure thing. So, for example, don't know which party, but I would bet Republicans right now would sort of fall into the Reagan-esque trust but verify.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a potential national security thing. We got to be very careful here. We got to move cautiously. And you might have Democrats, or many of them, taking more of a, well, let's not overreact. You know, let's see what we're really dealing with here. And maybe they're not. Maybe they're so interested in our nuclear power situation because they want to help us, or they don't want us to kill each other, right? Whereas another political,
they have very different attitudes on illegal aliens or undocumented immigrants. Yes. So they would have a different opinion on extraterrestrial aliens.
So I think we got some of the big picture stuff very, very right, and I'm still think it raised all the right questions as to who are the play. Any of this stuff involved, and I recall talking to you for hours on this, just trying to say, well, what we really need to understand to be logical here is who are the players going to be? You know, what power players in these different areas are going to step forward once it's okay and say, like you said about the New York Times, we'd like to own this a little bit more. Right. We're going to have to be first in here, and we're going to have to take some risk, but the payback for us will be that we will own this area. So I think we were right about that.
Yeah, I actually think like that probably will happen at some point. And by the way, I think I will agree that at some point, like the inevitability part of this equation is probably going to prevail. I just don't know how long that is.
How long are you prepared to wait? I mean, the problem I keep saying is I'm not the young man I was. Clearly, I'm 10 years older than the man I was when we were hanging out and writing this book. I don't want to be one of those UFO activists who went to his grave not knowing what was going on. It's unfair. It was wrong for Stanton Friedman a few years ago. It was wrong for Kehoe. It's wrong for all of these people who have worked so hard to have this happen, and I hope it doesn't happen to us.
Well, I don't know. I'm actually not.
You're a younger man than me, so you've got more years.
We'll see about that. One of the things that I definitely wanted to get into is the kind of cultural divide that I think we talked about this, that disclosure wasn't immediately, or maybe even for a long time, going to solve a lot of the issues that confronted our society. So, for example, president makes an announcement that extraterrestrials actually are real and are here. That comes out. So do we think that the current culture wars that we're seeing all across the Western world are simply going to end? Doubt it. Do we think that we'll all be able to agree on the nature of these other beings will be settled once and for all? Seriously doubt that. Yeah. Like, I think one thing we predicted was once there's an announcement, there would definitely be ideological lines within the society that would also divide off, because unless you make an announcement with a gray alien right there on the podium, which could be quite unlikely, there's still going to be all of this unknown, all these unknown factors that are going to play in that people will continue to argue about based on really ideological presuppositions. And I think, in other words, disclosure could exacerbate, at least for a certain period of time, a lot of the arguments and debates that we're having. And it may not solve, we may not get that moment of satisfaction, like, oh, now we know what it's all about. Like, it can just open up a whole.
Yeah, I don't think that's happening.
I think we really did treat that issue.
You know what you just captured there, and this was the thing that ultimately we ran up against in writing a book of this. I mean, I'm proud of us for biting off more than we could chew. I mean, I think that's the mark of a important piece of work, and I'm glad we did it. But the thing that we continually ran up against then, that we are running up against now, is when you talk about UFOs, you are trying to solve an equation with too many variables, right? And so the problem is we don't know we can't solve this equation right now. And if you can't solve the equation, you can't predict the future. So the equation has these variables. We said it in our book.
Yeah.
Who are they?
Right.
What do they want?
Hmm.
And what should we do next? Right? Well, if we don't, I mean, what should we do next is what you and I spent all our time trying to talk about, but we can't really answer that until we know who are they and what do they want.
Absolutely. And that is the ultimate question. Like we spent a fair amount of time in the book trying to flesh out who these beings probably are, what types of entities that people have encountered. And in terms of motivations, we talked about abductions, we talked about uh, other types of confrontations. We actually talked about positive confrontations, positive encounters. I think we really try to capture all of that. But no, it wasn't really possible for us at that time either to know for sure, like what are we dealing with? Are they friend or foe? And without knowing that is true, like it's really not possible to have a proper policy in place. Do we go to war with them? Do we make friends with them? Do we do the national security crowds, should they keep the cover up going because they don't really know? Like we didn't really have those answers. So that's going to hamper any investigation. One thing I do know that we did that I felt was important was talking about the need for this disclosure to be done properly. That is, through formal, proper, legal government channels, on the assumption that the government is the representative of the people. And we both know that that doesn't really work out in practice, but nonetheless, to ensure that proper government authorities, which are, at least in theory, responsible to the people, like the president, would take control of this and shine light on the black budget world that we both argued really had a lot of control over this.
Yeah, very tough to get into a lot of that stuff, which is why probably if there's been 5,000 books written about UFOs, that there's only been one written about disclosure, because everyone else would say that's just too much. I do think there is something at play here that I think the first time this was ever verbalized, I've come to like it, but I think we put it in our book, which is you can't know everything about what's going on, but you can make certain guesses that feel almost factual. So here's one of the guesses that we made that I think is hard to deny, which is that is humanity, the managers of this cover up or whatever, we and the others, whoever they are that have visited us from wherever they came from, agree on something. We know that we agree on it. We agree that it should be secret, right?
Yes, exactly.
Because we could have held a news conference in 1947 or any time since and said, by the way, that UFO stuff, that's real. Well, we never did that. And they could have landed on the White House lawn or blown up the White House, but they've never done that either. Everybody's been very indirect. So everyone has sort of agreed that this secret should be a little loosey-goosey, or it shouldn't be all in or all out. And so that if we were revising after disclosure right now, I'm sure that we would spend a few hours, a few rounds on the rings trying to say, okay, but what is actually going on with somebody allowed these videos out? These videos didn't have to come out.
They came, in my view, I think we can really thank Lou Elizondo for that, because it seemed he was able to get that. And I mean, I don't know every detail. Other people know this better than I do, but I think he had some friends within the proper offices who were able to help him. They went kind of low key on the whole UFO aspect of these objects and were able to get them out. And, it was only much more recently that the Navy itself released those same videos. But initially, Elizondo got them cleared for him. And once he was able to do that, he was legally allowed to put those videos out. It took a while before the Navy authenticated those videos.
Absolutely.
It's Elizondo. He did it.
But when the history of this time is written, those videos and how Elizondo got them out, because I'm sure you have the same situation. I've always said that over the years, I've had certain friends that treat me like the drunk uncle at the wedding. There goes Bryce talking about UFOs again, right? And what has made me not the drunk uncle at the wedding anymore, and instead has made me someone who people call up and send text messages going, dude, what's going on here? It's the videos. Those videos allowed people to join in and say, I guess my friend who knows something about this isn't completely batshit crazy. Maybe he knows something. And so that's allowed us to talk about it in a way. And going back to where we started, it has allowed the conversation to get in the barn door by saying, well, it could be a national security threat from another earthly power. That's how we got the discussion going. But we all know where this ends, right? I mean, you and I know where it ends. It doesn't end in China, and it doesn't end in Moscow. You know, it ends someplace else.
Absolutely. Totally agree. And I just completely lost my train of thought, and I had something that was relevant.
I have something very important to say.
Do it.
Your listeners may appreciate this, your viewers. I remember the first time we actually met, I picked you up and drove you from the Las Vegas airport to a UFO event you were doing.
I remember.
And all I remember, and I didn't think much of it at the time, but you were sitting in the back seat because we were with my wife, and you had a little plastic baggie with 7 almonds in it, and you ate your 7 almonds for the day. And I didn't think twice about that until a few years later. I realized that Obama does the same thing.
No kidding.
Yes.
Seriously?
7 almonds. It's either 7 or 9. So,
wow.
Do you still do that? Do you still do that?
I like almonds. I don't typically count them out, but I'll usually take a small handful. And when I can.
You know, don't ever say you're stuck again, because I'll start throwing stuff like that out in the interview, and you never know where that'll go.
Well, I remembered what I wanted to say.
Okay, good. See, it worked.
Which is, and this might actually be a good place to kind of take this. We were talking earlier about the radical revolutionary nature of the UFO cover-up. When we were doing After Disclosure, for me personally, I felt at the time, and I think I still feel, that the core of the cover-up centered around energy. Now, maybe I'm wrong, but essentially, I believed that once there was a genuine admission, like a confirmation that these objects are real, objects that could, like a Tic Tac UFO, instantly accelerate to multiple thousands of miles per hour without making a sound, that it would be evident to any journalist or any scientist that that object wasn't using petroleum to go from here to there. That it was employing some radical method of propulsion and indeed energy generation. And whatever that energy source was, it was not petroleum. And so that I'd always made this assumption that the end of UFO secrecy would implicitly mean the end of our petroleum-based era, at least for energy, because if we recognize that these things are using something other than energy, then how long would it be before a whole bunch of smart people got together and figured it out? So that it would portend a dramatic transformation of human civilization from petroleum to post-petroleum. And I always felt that way. And I thought that that might have been the number one reason for the secrecy to have maintained itself all these years. Like, you know, if you've got the oil men really owning the world, Rockefeller and their allies, they would be like, hey, wait a minute, 1950s. The world is swimming in oil. We have enough to last for centuries. Of course, by 1950s level of consumption, that would have been true. This isn't 1950. But B, why rock the boat? We're all happy. We're all making money. Do you really want the world to have free energy? Do you really want everyone to have their own little flying saucer they could go anywhere they want? Like, no. And so energy, it seemed to me, energy and propulsion were the reasons, some of the most important reasons for the cover-up. And
isn't the flip side of that, though, that you also don't want them to have it because they're going to fly flying saucers around and park them in their garage, but that if the same civilization that can make a nuclear bomb could make a hell of a weapon out of it?
Yes, absolutely. Like there are power reasons to keep that energy secret, but there are legitimate reasons too. Like we might trust ourselves with such an awesome amount of power or awesome capabilities, but do we trust every one of our neighbors? Do we trust everyone in our city, everyone in the world? And that's a problem. So I just always felt that the energy paradigm, the energy transformation was potentially the most radical of all of the transformations that would come in our society. And I just felt for that reason alone, there would not be an easy, like that the secret keepers would have to be pushed to the wall before they would admit anything. I think I still feel the same way about the energy part of it. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I think you're right. Although I wanted to just throw something in here because back when you and I were writing the book, this was just an old war story that I told about my time at Dark Skies. And I don't even think it made it in the book at the time because it's a story that my co-creator Brent Friedman told. But he had a guy that he grew up next to, and I won't go. This is the very short version. But this guy took him. He had Brent drive his car across the country in 1981 because he had just taken a position in the Reagan administration, and so Brent did that. And then the guy had been drinking, and he told Brent how he'd been basically briefed for 8 weeks at an underground facility outside of DC, kind of mind-blowing stuff. And he basically said, there is other life in the universe and I've seen it. That was a quote. All right. This guy, it's not important I give his name right now, but he, in the first term of the Reagan administration, was the Undersecretary of the Navy. So there's the Navy connection.
Well, anyone's going to be able to do the research and figure that out.
Okay, it's John Harrington.
Yeah.
Okay, and in the second,
when we did this, his name isn't there, and nor was Brent's name. So if you're fine with that,
and in the second term of the Reagan administration, John Harrington, Undersecretary of the Navy, who said he'd been briefed, who said there's other life in the universe and I've seen it, became Department of Energy cabinet member.
Yeah, and the DOE.
So there you go.
Most of the researchers who were looking at it, DOE has a more secretive structure, like a more impenetrable secrecy structure, probably than the Pentagon and probably than the CIA.
Yeah.
The DOE is believed to have some of the truly core secrets on the UFO subject within there. We don't know a whole lot about it, but a lot of eyes are looking at the DOE on this.
I just found that to be kind of something that's warmed up as a story since we were kicking things around. Well, so I don't think you're wrong. I think you're totally right. I think there were other reasons probably for the secrecy in addition to the, if you are making a ton of money and you have a nice life and everything, and you're worried that admitting to people that we're not alone and that they're here is going to rock your boat and take your money away from you, you're probably not going to want to do that.
Yeah.
So that's how they did it.
I was planning for us to do like about an hour, but I can't let this stop. You just dropped a pretty big bomb there. Yeah. And Harrington, he's out now. I don't know if he was out before by you. I don't know if you mentioned him before.
I have dipped my toe precariously in that water, but now Brent has not pulled me back. So yeah, John Harrington.
Fine. I'm actually really happy about that because when we wrote that was we had a couple of insider stories that we put into that book. So one was the Jimmy Carter hands in his on his head, like, weeping when he learned about disclosure. I'm not comfortable revealing the name. That was one that came to me, and the name of the individual who gave me that story.
It's widely quoted, by the way, which is weird because it puts us in the position of having a source that is widely quoted, and we're, it's too bad.
It's tough, but
you have to do it. That's the way
it will come out at some point. Like I will mention it, but I just feel like I can't right now. But the story with Brent and John Harrington was really, that was the other, like there were those two big stories that we just put out that we'd gotten personally.
Yeah.
And that was a story that you'd contributed, and it had always struck me as a very powerful story indeed. It's how it works. This is how these things leak out. You have someone who is introduced to a story and they're told, you must never talk about this, but then they do. And after one too many drinks with a trusted friend of the family, 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, whatever it was, it comes out.
And interestingly enough, Brent said to him at the time, "Why are you telling me this? I'm 18 years old. You know what?" And Harrington said, "Who's going to believe you? You're just a kid. Nobody's going to believe you."
Right.
So he was sort of right. Although, again, what's going to be interesting about a lot of these stories is once disclosure is fully underway, then these kind of stories suddenly fall back in as part of the historical record. And, the Carter story takes, on a different meaning and so forth. And
Jimmy Carter, I'll just, for anyone who doesn't know this offhand, I mean, it has been widely discussed actually, but it was June 14th, 1977. It was Carter's first few months as president, where a very well-placed individual told me, this is years ago, that Carter was indeed briefed on UFOs that day. That's interesting in itself. There's a UFO document that it's been disputed, and it's an alleged briefing of the president from that date. But I actually was told explicitly that Carter was briefed on UFOs that day. This individual does not know the contents of the briefing. He wasn't in the room, but did learn from a direct connection who was very close to, who was there, who saw at the conclusion of the meeting, Jimmy Carter was essentially either sobbing or nearly sobbing. He was deeply upset by what he had been briefed on. And we can only speculate on what that was. But that's the Jimmy Carter story.
Well, see, and that's the thing. I don't want to get giddy about disclosure. I'm glad we wrote the book, and I feel that it's an important topic. But I have to admit, I don't have a fully formed opinion about who they are and what they want. And so because of that, I'm as nervous as the next guy. Go ahead.
I've actually done my little journey on what I think is going on, and it's constantly evolving. But one thing that I don't know how much we got into this in our book, actually. You have to remind me. Human-looking non-humans.
Right.
And the reason I'm saying this is that for many years, like I would push those stories aside psychologically. Like I did not want to consider them, despite the fact that when you go back through all of the UFO occupant sightings that people have had, probably the single largest group that people identify are operators of these craft that look human.
Yeah.
And right behind them are short little grays in terms of the number of sightings. But these human occupants, so it's easy. We try to forget them because we want to think extraterrestrial, interplanetary, they can't possibly look like us. How is that possible? And that was always my assumption.
Yeah.
Exobiologists and astronomers would always say, and I remember this, they would say, well, we can't expect other life forms from other planets to look anything like us. Why would they have 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, and all of that? They could look totally different. However, I've been really turning this around in my mind for a while now. And for a number of reasons, I actually think that there are good reasons to argue that there are at least some of these other beings that look like us. Now, it could be that 40,000 years ago, if we were genetically tweaked, which I have come to believe that we were, that's a whole other thing that we have not talked about.
Right, exactly.
But that some of us might have been taken back then and maybe adopted. And there could be a whole human-looking race of essentially alien in culture that might be interacting with us. They could have been raised and adopted by extraterrestrials way back then. We would have nothing in common with them. That's one possibility. Another possibility is maybe there are parallel forms of evolution on other worlds that are Earth-like, that have, they're in the sweet spot of their orbit of their sun. And that, I think I just read, there's something like 6 billion Earth-like planets estimated in the Milky Way galaxy right now. That means they're rocky, they're about the size of Earth, they're about the same distance from theirs, all of that. And maybe evolution of successful creatures does evolve in certain similar ways. Plant, animal, maybe that's the case. Maybe successful predators might be 5-6 feet above the ground with predator focal eyes,
right? Stereoscopic hearing,
with all of it. Like that's a success for evolution. With 2 arms and 2 hands are really useful, and bipedal, like that could be a thing that is replicated elsewhere. They might not look exactly like us, but they might look enough like us that they would be humanoid. So to me, that doesn't any longer sound crazy. But here's the last thing I'm just going to say here. This is just me putting my own little theory out there. I think that there are a number of other beings that don't look anything like us.
Yeah.
And I think that there are a number of beings that do. And the thing that we want to ask, and I think we did discuss this, is to what extent, A, they live among us right now, and then to what extent human beings are going utterly to freak out after disclosure with that very thought.
We did talk about that. We called it the new McCarthyism, where instead of saying, my next door neighbor's a goddamn communist, instead you go, my next door neighbor's one of them. I'm pretty sure of it.
Right.
By the way, there's one, by the way, that kind of blows me away. I'm really interested to hear that. That's fascinating. And one possibility, I wondered if you considered it though, is we know modern abductions sort of started in the Betty and Barney time period, which is why I did Dark Skies there. Right. And that there is some evidence right now that they're not as common as they were. I don't know if you've run across
I hear
people
this
say that.
I don't know how true that is.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't either. But let's just say that there was a plan, right? That the plan is you show up, you reconnoiter. So, and let's say that, we live in a human time frame. Well, for us, that means, for my kids, that means like the next 50 minutes. For you and I, maybe we could make a 5-year plan. The government can't, right? So maybe we live in a 5-year time frame, and maybe they live in a 500-year time frame, right? We don't really know. It may very well be that Jacobs or others like him were correct, that there was the DNA component to create a human that could pass with among us, and maybe that job is done. Is that possible?
Sure. I mean, that would be possible. In his last book, Walking Among Us, which now is about 7 or 8 years old, I guess, he certainly gave me the impression in that book that the program was ongoing, that it was still continuing, at least from the people that he was regressing. Now, look, I know David, and I really respect his work a lot, and I think he's more right than not with his research. But there's critiques that people make of him, saying, well, if you're not really leading the witness, then you're at least getting people who are predisposed to a certain belief set about these ETs. I don't really think I buy that.
Yeah,
but, that is a critique that people have made. What I actually think is what I think is actually happening is one of the things that Jacobs talks about, and another abduction researcher, Yvonne Smith, who I really respect and I'm friends with, she finds this the same thing with her people, is a lot of these abductees are talking about a forthcoming great change. Right. That they're expecting. Now, David has interpreted that, seems to me, by meaning that there's going to be this takeover, like a planetary takeover that these human hybrids are going to be doing. I actually no longer believe that that's the great change. I think that we are living through the great change right this minute. And I think that we're moving to a new phase of human civilization and indeed maybe a new human form of organization. And I think that's actually the great change that we are living through, and that they probably foresaw and are either trying to ride that change to the best of their ability, or at least be present for it. I think that's what's happening. Yeah, I think we're moving to a totally new phase.
If these big sweeping things are going on, though, then I see the problem is how to reconcile all these disparate things that fit in your head. And you can't just go, well, I'll compartmentalize them, because they're all happening potentially simultaneously. But, why are Tic Tacs following our carrier strike groups?
Yeah, right.
I mean,
well, they've been doing it forever.
Yeah. What's that all about? What do they get out of it? I mean, what's going on?
I'm going to speculate. I think they're just very damned interested in our military tech and our capabilities. Think of it this way. For thousands of years, human beings lived almost in exactly the same way. Wherever you were on planet Earth, your life was basically dominated by muscle power and animals pulling wooden carts with very rudimentary wheels and plows. And that was human civilization, whether you were in Renaissance Europe, medieval Europe, ancient China, sub-Saharan Africa. The patterns of life varied here and there, but they were basically the same. If there was something that happened in the sky, most cultures didn't have writing. They didn't have the ability really to deal with it. And we just kind of plodded along. And frankly, we weren't all that interesting.
True.
We just weren't. And I think there would have been no point for an active ET influence in our society back then. They might have had a moderate little monitoring here and there, but like, what would be the use for them to be like the ancient kings of like, of the
very true
early England? Like, why would they have cared? It's a very primitive, type of life. Even if you're a king in a castle, like, it's not a big deal. But once we started developing science, really from like the 19th century onward, science and industry, then we started becoming very interesting and very capable and actually very dangerous. And by the 20th century, we were like in a state of constant technological revolution where we had the ability now to detect them electronically with radar and other means, and to see them because we were in the air. And suddenly we humans, then we start developing nuclear weapons. Like, all of us was like that. So my feeling is they've been watching us kind of a low key for all these years. And suddenly Stanton Friedman used to say it like, the kids now have the matches. The kids now, there's a gun lying around and they've got it. So that's us. And I think that's what triggered all of these types of sightings where you see them over nuclear weapons, and nuclear technology, and over all kinds of military encounters as well. I think that they were interested in whatever capabilities that we have. And I think that explains the large number of UFO military encounters, both above and below the water, because they happen below the water. So I think that they're interested in what we're up to. I think they're watching us very closely, wondering, wanting to know where we're at and deciding what they're going to do about it.
Beautifully stated, my friend. And I think it gives us kind of a circular thing, because we were wondering, are there dynamics that are going to shift this, or is there an all stop planned, and then we're just going to go back to the status quo? And we were talking about it's inevitable. Here's why it's inevitable. And you are the one that coined the phrase, because it's in that lovely 10-minute video we made to promote the book I just listened to. And it's a beautiful statement, but you concluded by saying, we are preparing to leap into their world.
Yeah.
That's a phrase that should be registered to Richard Dolan. Richard M. Dolan, leap into their world. And
volume 2 of National Security State.
Good. I just feel that that's the game changer. It doesn't even matter what the government, right now the government can suppress, and we have our own human political stuff that we got to get through and all that. But the long-term thing is this technology that built nuclear weapons and all these other things that you just mentioned. I mean, the litany is phenomenal. I mean, when my grandmother was born, there were no airplanes or cars or anything, right? Now look at us. I even do that to my kids now. I go, well, you have it so easy because, and so we have all that stuff. We are leaping into their world. And I know we're running short on time. I wanted to throw one thing out there. We talk there's all the nuts and bolts stuff that we just discussed, but there is the phenomenon point of view of this thing where it's just weird. And I don't think you remember this. So I'm just going to tell you this story because it happened on our watch while we were doing After Disclosure. We had one of those late night conversations that you had mentioned. And I had the file open on Google Docs, and I was taking a few notes, and then I saved it. Right. And I thought it was a productive session. Always fun to talk to you about UFOs for a couple hours. It was great. I went to bed. I got up the next morning. I opened that same file, and in the middle of the file, there were maybe 10 or 11 lines that just had the number 3 printed on it.
Oh, yeah.
And I just remember going, okay, that didn't exist when I closed this document because I printed it. I had seen the document and printed it. So I then knew what was on it. But the next morning, all these threes.
Hmm.
And I know threes are somehow sometimes important in the synchronicity. You get woken up at 3:33 or whatever like that. But it happened to us, and I can't explain it. It's just weird.
You didn't fall asleep with your head on the keyboard?
I shut it down while we were talking. That would be, and then, I'm sure there's, 95% chance there's a pretty good reason for it, but it was just strange. Just one of those moments where I go, okay, it's time to go to bed. This is
I
too
can tell
crazy.
you, I wasn't messing with you, so it wasn't me.
Right. Very strange stuff.
Crazy. Well, this has actually been really great. Like, there's so much in our book that we actually haven't unpacked, but I think, what was, for me, I look back on this and I think I really like the one thing that comes out, again, I said this before, is the revolutionary nature of the change across the board.
Yeah.
And I think we're still waiting for that revolutionary moment. Like, it hasn't happened. And so I think the real question is, I don't know how we're going to answer this, but what it will take now, we're in 2020, moving forward, for that avalanche, that uncontrolled, panicked movement by the national security state, the deep state, whatever, to control this or to deal with this in one way or another, or will it go out of control? Like, we're not there. I keep waiting. There's one thing I would like to add here, actually, if you don't mind, which I think in the last 10 years since we wrote this book, there has been one thing that has happened way faster than I could have predicted, which is a kind of consolidation of the internet by major corporate powers. So back in 2010, I don't know how this would be with you, but with me, I was still working very much on the assumption that social media was free, essentially, like free discussions. YouTube was not going to be censored the way that it really has become, and that Google would continue to be a semi-honest algorithm, search algorithm, which it absolutely is not anymore. And so what we've seen in the last decade, and especially really ramping up in the last 5 years, is a rapid, almost a breathtakingly fast consolidation of power over control of this new media. The old legacy media, we all know about Operation Mockingbird, and then how the New York Times and the WAPO and Fox and CNN, how they've worked with the establishment. But with the internet establishment, the internet news, back in 2010, I think there were some far-sighted people who saw that this would happen, but it wasn't happening.
No.
And what's happened now, it seems to me, is with enough control over the internet narrative, whereas, like, you go to YouTube and you type in UFO, like, I would encourage anyone to do this. You're just going to get like news stories by CNN, BBC, Fox, CNN, all corporate news. It's all corporate, and that's a dishonest algorithm. Like, there's only one way to do that, is by cheating, by getting them that way. So I guess what I'm saying is, we're at a point now where a disclosure can, in theory, come out with genuine control over the narrative by an elite group that I don't think I could have imagined 10 years. Like, I was thinking 10 years ago that there was a greater likelihood that this could go out of control. And I look at it now and I think, I don't know. Like, I think it's actually possible. Everything seems dumbed down to me. Is this just me getting old? But like, education, bad. Entertainment, bad. News media, pretty bad. Really awful. Food, bad. Like, health, bad. Like, are we really in a position where we have an engaged citizenry that's actually going to take this issue on? And I just wonder, like, have we moved into an era where there's such a level of control that this could be rolled out and then stopped, and then for 10, 20, 30 years, we live in this partial fiction world, and then a little more comes out, and then that's another hold for another 10, 20 years. And I mean, eventually, I think in the long run, the truth will probably come out, but I wonder, like, it could be a long time.
You talked about it in involved citizenry, and when the dumbing down, maybe this kind of, for people listening in, is kind of how we would do this. It's like, okay, I hear that. And then I'm saying, but on the other hand, it is possible that a dumbed down citizenry would be the ideal citizenry to reveal this to, because they might not take it so personally, and they might not get the pitchforks, right? That they might just go, I'm so distracted by, everything else. I'm in quarantine, and my car needs a new set of tires, and I'm beyond the capacity to shock. So yeah, they told, I heard something about the UFOs. So that's real. Okay, moving on.
And that's kind of happening. Like, that's the situation right now.
So this may be the right time to do it. The very first of those articles I wrote was one called "We Can Handle the Truth," because the question that you have to ask yourself in a time of politics as dysfunctional as ours are, pandemic as dysfunctional as ours is, and protests as dysfunctional as ours are, you've got these three society wrenching things going on. And so the argument could be, well, whatever you do, don't throw aliens into that. But it may be counterintuitive that is the perfect time to throw aliens in.
Funny, my wife Tracy was telling me this privately not long ago. She said, this actually could be the perfect time for it to come out, because we're just so preoccupied with everything else. And that too is not something that we really could have seen 10 years ago. Like, no. I think it's fair to say that for generations and generations, the assumption was, if aliens were revealed, that would be the greatest game changer, that would dominate everything. And it probably would, and it probably still can, but right now it's definitely a soft sell, and people are still just barely waking up to this. Outside of the UFO bubble, which we are in. We're in the UFO bubble. But people outside that, they're like, oh yeah, interesting. Gee, like, that's about it. I go shop at Aldi. The people at Aldi, they all know me, because it's like my favorite store in the world, and they know about the UFO thing, and they get excited.
Right.
But, most of the places in the world, I think people are just sort of going about with their lives, just like you said.
I think it's certainly true. I mean, in my little house bubble, I've been, getting excited about, these articles, and also what I'm reading and stuff on your site. And I'm basically saying to the people in my bubble, don't you understand? They've admitted they're real. Okay. Yeah. And people are like, yeah, okay. I saw this tweet today about, so I don't know. I mean, I think people's capacity to take the information and not freak out may have been something, maybe we overestimated the freak out. Maybe there won't be as much freak out. If there is anything that we may have slightly erred on, but then again, I still go back, even though I could make that argument, I still go back to the questions. Who are they and what do they want? Because whether we freak out or not, and your theories are fascinating, but they still don't tell you intent, right? So it's like, then you still get down to, I will reserve my right to freak out based on who are they and what do they want. If they're here for good and decent purposes, and it doesn't influence the potential end of my family and of all life on earth, then okay. But if they got bad intentions, we need to be careful about that.
Seems to me, yes, to everything you've just said there. I think what we're experiencing now is proof that there's disclosure, but disclosure really won't mean a thing without official confirmation. In other words, even the New York Times really isn't, it's not prominent enough to make this stick. So it's got to be from, and I know we talked about this, like, who is authorized to do the disclosure? Where's it going to come from? So I think our assumption was the president of the United States would be a very obvious choice. You could hypothesize leaders of a select few other nations, China or Russia, might have the ability to make it to make it stick worldwide if they were to present that information, if there was a desire.
Yeah. The Pope.
The Pope, yeah, another. And like, right, there's a few.
Yeah.
And then the US president. Although you have to wonder, like, if Trump were to do it, like right now,
I don't think it would carry the weight.
Half the country would be like, "You're crazy anyway, man. Like, we don't believe you." He would have to provide more than a 2 a.m. tweet, which is what I used to imagine doing. Which in theory, like, presumably he would do that. I mean, any president would. You'd have to go there and you'd have to be able to defend it to the world. But it would have to take something like that, like an official confirmation, before people actually are going to change their lives about it. And what it will take to get there is the real question. I think on your blog, you kind of hypothesized about that. Am I?
Oh, about the. Well, I did write one that.
Does Trump have a little?
It was called Trump's October Surprise.
Yeah, exactly.
Just the theory that, you know, if the guy thinks I'm losing and it's all over, what is the number one thing you do in politics? You try to distract. You know, you might very well throw it out in the final debate and see what sticks, because it would at least reshuffle the deck. Although the election will probably be closer than that, and Trump probably wouldn't do that, and but I think the one thing, again,
way closer than the polls have said, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, way.
But that's what I'm saying. So I think it's probably not going to be a Hail Mary required kind of situation. It's going to be a nail biter till the last minute. But what I was going to say is, I really don't want to get hate mail from pro or anti-Trump people. I'm just making a statement here that if there is a person who might do it off the cuff, he's the guy. Yeah, absolutely. It wouldn't have ever been a Barack Obama. Barack Obama could have done it, but he would have done it because he would have studied it. He would have thought about it. He'd have gotten reports on it. People would have recommended it.
He was an ultimate team player.
Yes.
And Obama, like George W. before him, these are guys who were basically working with Wall Street, with the national security apparatus. Now, it's not that Trump doesn't, but Trump, we've got to remember, Trump had to take down the Republican establishment, which hated him every bit as much as the Democrat establishment hates him now. And so Trump really was genuinely an outsider of that whole thing. And this is a guy who I don't think that he is anywhere a free agent as president. I think he's been completely, or at least largely, cornered by the neocons, for example, so that he basically has taken on a lot of Hillary Clinton's foreign policy. Although we don't have any new wars yet, so I'm still like giving him some credit on that. But I think, the lot of neocons are still very dominant in his administration. Where he's still different is on the whole issue of globalization. At least to some extent, he hasn't really gone on board, and that's, I think, actually why he's still hated by a lot of the establishment. But he is a guy who you could foresee doing something totally crazy like that.
And again, what would be the credibility of it? But because what's so strange about the time we live in is that Trump can be asked about UFOs and go, "Well, I've heard about that," as if he heard about it someplace other than in the Oval Office, right? He goes, "Well, people say things." What? You're the president, and yet we've seen other presidents before who either didn't get briefed,
right,
or if they were briefed, like Carter, took it badly. So, Trump seems to be moving along in a scenario where he hasn't really been deeply briefed. He's probably been shown better versions of the videos that we've seen, maybe.
He did talk about Roswell with his son, which actually is interesting. And there's been these little hints, just here and there that really do make you think he's given it some thought.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how deep it goes with him either. But he's in the last year, he's become a little more interesting. I mean, that whole interview he did with Lou Dobbs, which was just less than 1 month ago. And Lou Dobbs, who everyone knows is tight with the president. Lou Dobbs is buddies with Donald Trump. He asks Trump on TV. I mean, this might have been planned in advance for all we know.
Yeah, for sure it was.
My friends are asking me about UFOs. And he, clearly Dobbs is interested in this. And Trump actually, I thought, handled that actually pretty cleverly. Like he like a real politician would do. He kind of laughed it off and said, "Well, Lou, you're the expert. I'll put you in charge."
Right. Yeah.
Which obviously, and then half the media, most of the media is like, Trump's so stupid. He thinks Lou Dobbs is an expert. Trump was clearly making it as a joke. Like that was obvious. But I thought he handled that actually pretty well.
Although it was the world's worst thing, though. Lou Dobbs smirked through the entire thing, which I'm so tired of the UFO smirk. Didn't like that. And well, he calls himself a journalist, and he did not ask a single follow-up question. And he let the interviewee just go, "See ya," and off he went. So while it was a step, it was a baby step.
Oh, totally. And the whole smirking, laughing thing, because I looked at that too. I interpreted that as a very kind of standard thing that a lot of serious professionals will do when they confront a subject like UFOs, because they don't know emotionally how to handle it. And a lot of them will laugh.
Yeah.
They're almost laughing at themselves. Like, I can't believe I'm asking about UFOs on national TV. And that's how I interpreted that. I actually thought that he was serious about it. The only thing I'll just say here about Trump is you've got his son, Don Jr., and you've got Dobbs, two people really close to him.
And Tucker Carlson.
And Carlson, who we know, there's three, they are into UFOs. Yeah. And they all have Trump's ear. So to me, I don't know of any other president, actually, where we know that they have that many people close to them who are really into UFOs. That's kind of an interesting thing. And Trump's been very careful about expressing anything about this. He's actually been, he has not been shooting from the hip on this at all. He's been actually very reserved, I think. So it's curious, like, will he do something about it or not? And I mean, it'd be kind of fun to think that he would. I'm expecting no. I've expected no all along. But hey, the guy might surprise us. That would be something.
I expect no too. But when you say that he might surprise, that is, I think, the lesson of the AD book. What we were saying is we're going to try, without a crystal ball, to describe the PowerPoints and the levers that are at work in this societal thing that's going on. And then we're gonna drop UFO disclosure into the middle of it, and we're going to try to describe that for you. That's all we set out to do.
And the one thing where we really concluded that this might be a good place to end this is we recognize something that I think cannot be denied, which is that the true outing of the UFO secret will change our world in so many critical ways that it will force a reevaluation of not just so many of the institutions of power in this world, but really of ourselves, our own psychology, our own conception of ourselves as a species, as human beings, and ourselves in the place in the universe. Like, that's what it will do. And it will, for that reason, it is so important to try to visualize what those changes will be, because some of the things I'm sure that you and I wrote about will happen. Like, given enough time, that avalanche and that revolution in our psyche I think that will happen.
It will. And I think that we're hoping for is that what we call disclosure actually is a little more fulsome, that it answers some of these questions. I would like a disclosure that answers at least who are they and what do they want. I would like that. That would be my basic disclosure. If all we get from disclosure is, by the way, those things flying around that we got those videos of, they're not Chinese and they're not Russian and they're not ours, and that's all we really know.
Right.
Thank you and good night.
Which is where we are right now.
Yeah. And I would like to see something in advance of that. And I think ultimately we will see that. And I would just like to see it sooner than later. Although by the way, careful what you wish for. Let's just put that out there. UFO disclosure may come, and the reason we may then see quite well why it was held up all these years. And it might be partly about energy, and it might be partly about something we don't quite comprehend right now.
Well, if I can ask, you mentioned John Harrington before, and I'm sure he's loving the fact that he's just been outed on our program.
Oh God. Yes. I'm sorry, Mr. Harrington. Please don't call your friends. I'm living a quiet life in Southern California.
But he had indicated that this was a very like deeply disturbing
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
And, he mentioned I'm upset because I have children to think about.
Yeah. I think he said, I have 2 girls,
Yeah.
and this is the world they're going to grow up in.
Yeah.
He
It's
said,
like,
no, he said he cried himself to sleep every night during this briefing. And Brent said, my God, why? And he said, because I have 2 girls and this is the world they're going to grow up in.
right. And that type of story is not unique. Like there's this dark element to this whole reality that's lurking in the background. And so that might have something to do with why this secret has been kept all along.
We may look back on 2010 or 2020 and go, those were the days, my friend. Those
Yeah.
were the days.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Oh, well.
Well, we're moving into something very, very different. Like I think probably 50 years from now, long after we're not around and there's new generations that are here, they're going to be living in a very, very different world, organized on very different ways with new dominant types of technology, very, very strong advanced artificial intelligence, probably some form of quantum computing or beyond, total 5G or beyond, 24/7 surveillance. There's like not going to be any privacy. That's gone. And a completely different type of a world with probably a very different kind of human psychology. And in that, I just suspect that the fundamental concerns of people in the future that might be different. There might be a lot of different things, and within that context, the presence of advanced non-humans living among us or visiting us. I just wonder, like, will future generations look back at this question and will they say that is so important, or will they say, meh, not that big a deal. Who cares? Like,
I got to go with the former because it just seems so destabilizing. I think that's why we felt like I wouldn't call it a moral obligation or whatever, but we felt an obligation of some kind to write this book because we knew intuitively that it's a big deal, right?
yeah,
So, and it's a big deal. Now, what we thought was going to be the thing worth really looking into is how are we going to deal with this big deal? That's the question.
right,
And
right.
it was the question of 2010 and it's the question of 2020, because again, as we've said, we've only dipped our toe in the water here. We're not in the pool yet. And we'll find out when we jump into that pool, is that water going to be cold or is like a nice warm bath? Who knows? We don't know.
All right. Well, I think this is a pretty good point on which
Yeah.
to conclude this part of the interview. And Bryce, I'm just so glad we got to do this. Like,
Me too.
this was a great chat about the really cool book that we wrote, and I really like a lot of the things that we were discussing just in the last 30 minutes as well. That kind of opened this up. So I hope that listeners and viewers have enjoyed it as well. So that's all we got for this, and I guess I want to thank everyone who's tuned in or come into our station. You don't tune in anymore. Anyone who's been here with us, I hope you've enjoyed it as well. I certainly have enjoyed talking to my friend and colleague and co-author Bryce Zabel, which, by the way, again, Bryce, your blog site, On the Trail of the Saucers, is
It's on.
It's a great
Thank
website.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's on Medium. Whatifufos.com will get you there. I want to say goodbye to everybody. And let me just say to you, Rich, wow, what a great thing to sort of relive those moments. Because as I look back on my life, there's highs and lows, of course, like everybody's. And I look at that one as a real high because I felt like not only was it fun, as we've stated, but it was important fun. And
it was original.
Yeah, it was original. So thank you. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you. And thank you for listening. And remember, while we learn and grow and search for the truth, let's be good to each other. Later.